Hi, this is Venus from Yoga Path, and today we have Mayank with us. Mayank is a corporate executive during the week, and during the weekend, he's a yoga instructor. Very philanthropic inclined, and around the clock, he's a yoga ambassador. Mayank is the founder of Yoga Smriti. He is a certified teacher from Shivanand Yoga Vedanta Center. He has been practicing for approximately 25 years and he has been teaching since 2004. He's taught in many cities like Dubai, Doha, and Sri Lanka as well. Mayank's classes have a blend of many forms and styles of yoga, but at the center, at the heart, it's more the Shivananda attitude and classical Hatha Yoga practices. Mayank's personal practice is founded on the principles of Abhyasa, which is persistent practice, Swadhyay, self-study, and Seva, service. Proceeds from his classes have been directed to various charitable organizations and humanitarian causes across the globe for children in need. So today, Mayank will be, shedding some light on certain areas of asanas, specifically inversions. Mayank, what exactly would you categorize as inversions? As in, what asanas would fall under that category as inversions?
Yeah. So I think, there's a big fallacy out there that inversions are just headstands or shoulder stands, right? Because that's what most people tend to think of as inversions. But inversion is generally anything which brings the head lower than the heart. So, a standing forward bend is an inversion. A downward dog is an inversion. A fish pose is also an inversion because, you've raised your heart and you've dropped your head back. So anything that actually goes against the grain in terms of the heart being lower than the head, anything that inverts that is really an inversion. So yoga practitioners shouldn't just look at headstands and shoulder stands as inversions, but everything else, because depending on your state of health, depending on where you've started your journey from, sometimes a headstand or a shoulder stand might not be advisable for you. So you need to start out with the most basic inversion, which could even be a child pose, right? In the child pose, there's a slight elevation of the heart over the head. So you start out from there and then you build up. So if there's one thing that I want to leave people with about inversions is do not get intimidated by them, but you can take step by step progress towards them.
Why would one want to do inversions? As in, what is the necessity? Is it required to incorporate inversion into yoga? What do you think?
Yeah, so it almost troubles me that these days, because you want to make yoga as accessible as possible, which is good on its own. Most teachers remove inversions. One, they don't spend enough time themselves on inversions. So one, they're not confident of taking a class into an inversion. Two, they feel that they would probably lose out students if they brought inversions into the class. So they keep inversions out. But really, the heart and soul of yoga is in inversions, because that's where it differentiates itself from other forms of physical exercise or well-being, right? Because no other form of somatic movement really involves inversions the way that yoga does or emphasizes on. And there's a reason for that. Most of the ancient scriptures, in fact, tell us that if you were to do headstands or inversions regularly, you would gain immortality. And I'll come to that a little later. But just from a normal person, present day perspective, one of the biggest issues is either our circulatory health or our endocrine health, right? These are the two biggest things that affect people. And these are the two things that inversions immediately addresses. So, yes, running is great and so on, but you also need the heart to get a rest, which it does in inversions. It goes against its sort of nature, right? It's not pumping blood to the brain, but it's pumping blood now back to the feet. So it's doing something completely different to what it is used to. So that's a very important aspect of it, right? The endocrine system is probably the most benefited from inversions, because you're nourishing or you're reaching for more blood to the pituitary, to the pineal gland, to the hypothalamus, to the thyroid. And most of our current present day issues come from this hormonal imbalances, which really inversions are probably one of the best ways to address that.
Right.
In fact, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. All these lifestyle diseases are mostly endocrine related, so it makes sense.
Absolutely. And for the endocrine system to work well, there are two axes that need to work well, right? Which is the HPA axis and the HPT axis. So The HPT is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the thyroid. And when you do the headstand and the shoulder stand together, and then you do a forward bend, then there goes the HPA also, which is the adrenal gland, right? So this HPA and HPT axes work on negative feedback mechanism and regulate each other back. And these get benefited mainly from doing the headstand, shoulder stand, and the forward bend, seated forward bend. So, Swami Shivananda and Krishnamacharya, who are probably the biggest yoga masters of the last century, both of them coincidentally advocated these three asanas for perfect health. Shivananda went as far as saying that, you don't need to do anything else apart from headstand, shoulder stand, and forward bend to be in good health.
Seriously.
And Krishnamacharya said almost the same thing. So, these people obviously knew what they were saying.
Yeah, makes sense. Like you said earlier, it's quite, daunting, as in anybody doing a headstand and a shoulder stand. Okay, maybe the younger generation, that's what, generally people think about. It's, as the age increases, people either don't want to try it, it's further out from their comfort zone. So what do you suggest and what do you think should be done? How do you approach this so that it gets a little easier?
The ashram that I learned at, we had an 84-year-old woman who could hold a perfect headstand or a shoulder stand, And when I asked her when did she start out, I was assuming she would say in her, teens and her early 20s. She said, I started out yoga at 72.
Wow.
So, there's absolutely no limit in that sense. And of course, you need to be cognizant of your health condition and so on and take your doctor's advice. But if you don't have sort of cardiovascular or blood pressure issues, you can start inversions straight into a headstand, shoulder stand, even much later in life and benefit from it. But let's assume that you've started out late, you probably are not in the ideal weight range, or you have some other issues. Then it's okay to use props. It's okay to start out slow, right? And you can get most of the benefits of a headstand, for example, in doing half a headstand. So let's say you first try out just the forward bends, and you start getting used to the forward bend, a standard forward bend, right? Uttanasana. And then you start finding out that if I put my head down and I still keep my feet on the ground, how does that feel, right? What does that pressure feel like? What does it feel like? And you're going to get most of the benefits there in any case. So you can even do what I call a quarter headstand, which is to still keep your knees on the ground, but just keep your head down, right? So you start from something as simple as that, where you've got your head down on the floor, you've got your knees down, and you're just experimenting with the feeling. You can then take your knees off the floor, right? And then at some stage when you feel comfortable, but having worked enough on your core so that your core can take your feet going up and keeping a wall against you, you start going up and seeing how it feels against a wall, right? If you have the ability to do it with a teacher, that's brilliant, that's perfect, right? But even if you don't have the ability to do it with a teacher, but you've taken care of getting your doctor's advice, you've strengthened your core, and you don't have any other issues that negate you from inversions, you need to experiment and find for yourself how it is. And it's great to be playful in inversions, right? So that's my advice, right? Explore them. Don't get intimidated by them. You can do quarter of a headstand, you can do half a headstand, and you can go into that. Or you don't do any of that. You do just downward dogs, you do, forward bends, and that's all right. But do something which brings your head lower than your heart.
It's very interesting. But I've also heard of this, they call the queen and the king of asanas. Why so?
Yeah, so, like I started out by talking about the HPT axis and the HPA axis. So one is that, right? The headstand really focuses on the HPA axis and the shoulder stand on the HPT axis. So they are supposed to complement each other and work together with each other. But the king of the asanas, in a way, also because of the yang energy and because of the sort of high energy pose that headstand requires you to be. It needs you to be active. It needs you to be completely, there at that moment, and it increases your. If you do it for too long, for example, Iyengar and some of the other books have said that your ego rises or your sort of irritability rises because when you leave your feet off the ground and go up in the headstand, your ego starts surfacing. So it's a paradoxical thing. As the feet leave, your ego rises, right? And if you focus just on the headstand, you tend to become a little bit more egotistical. The shoulder stand brings that down. It's called the queen of the asanas because it's focused on the yin energy. So it sort of balances the yang of the headstand and brings the body back into sort of that balance. So that's one of the reasons why it's called the king and the queen of the asanas. But if you go into one of the more esoteric reasons, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika or some of the other scriptures state that, you can achieve immortality through Viprita Karanis, right? So they put all the inversions under the banner of Viprita Karani, which means against the grain, or, something which is inverted. And the reason, they put these two together is the way they balance themselves. So when you go onto the headstand, you actually activate the pineal gland, or what we call the Bindu chakra as well, right? So in the esoteric sense, it's the Bindu chakra, and the Bindu chakra is what releases Amrit in the body. That's the belief, right? And a lot of yoga scholars have equated that to melatonin being released from the pineal gland, right? So they believe that melatonin itself is such a strong hormone that it can be considered the elixir or the Amrit of life. But from a yoga scriptures point of view, the pineal gland or the Bindu chakra, which coincides with releases Amrit. Now this Amrit is falling down into the Manipura chakra and getting consumed without getting processed. So when it's getting consumed without processing it, you're not getting the nurturing benefits of it, right? So you're not becoming immortal in that sense. But the minute you invert it with the headstand, so one, you're slowing down the flow of it. And when you add the shoulder stand to it, what you're doing, you're putting the chin lock, right? So you've got something called the Talu chakra here, which is at the palate, right? So when you put your tongue on the Talu chakra, what happens is that the Amrit gets stored in the Talu chakra for processing. As it gets processed, it then goes into the throat, where you're holding it with the Jalandhara Bandha or the throat chakra. And that is when it sort of really gives its benefit to the body. So you can say, in a sense, the thyroid is giving the benefit, or the chakra is giving the benefit. And then when it flows down to the Manipura chakra, it has already been processed by the body. The nutrients have been, or the nourishment has been taken, and then it goes down, so it's not getting burnt up. So that's the esoteric view of doing it. And there's obviously the endocrinal benefit, which I talked about. There's also the psychological benefit of doing asana inversions, right? Because you're putting yourself in a place of complete unbalance and uprooting yourself from what you understand. So you sort of develop a sense of resilience, because you realize that even if you're inverted, or if the world has turned upside down, you still survive. You're okay, right? And you finally find a way to balance in that. So there's so much benefits out of it, right? Psychological, physiological, endocrinal, and esoteric. So yeah, I don't even know if I deviated away from your question, but hopefully I answered some of it.
No, I think you've answered quite a few questions. In fact, those who are thinking of starting off with inversions, they'd be more encouraged to do so. Now, this one last question. I know that there are a few broad, categories where they should not, practice inversions. What do you think? Is there any particular, they just cannot do any form of inversion, that kind of category? Or if they could practice, how could they practice?
So I think if you have any sort of blood pressure issues, you need to come to it with a certain level of caution. So it depends on where your blood pressure is, how it's being maintained right now with medicines or not. Taking your doctor's advice. You start out slowly, right? You start out with the downward dog or with balasana and so on, and then you figure out your way between half headstand and so on. If you feel the pressure increasing, of course you go out of it, right? So I think you need to have a continuous dialogue with your teacher or with your medical practitioner to see if you can go into it or not, if you have a heart issue or a blood pressure issue. It's preventative, right? So if you have started doing it early in life, it's actually going to prevent it. If it's mildly there, it's going to be curative. But if it's very high, then you need to proceed with caution. If you have eye-centric problems, glaucoma or anything else in terms of pressure on the eyes, then I think you have to be even more careful, probably more than blood pressure issues. You need to be more careful when you have eye problems. So that really needs a good ophthalmologist to advise you and a good yoga teacher to assess and tell you whether you can do it or not. The other time is when you're in a menstrual cycle, whether you do it or not. It's there are two schools of thought. I think most schools of thought seem to agree now that something like a Adho Mukha Svanasana or a downward dog is okay, but maybe a headstand or a shoulder stand is not okay. So that's a personal choice. You probably want to do your own research and study onto it, and then take a decision whether you want to do it or not at that stage. So these are some of the broad sort of areas when you want to proceed with caution and decide for yourself and based on some medical advice.
It's very interesting, and it's very, very eye-opening that it has so many benefits. And it's not actually, as it doesn't take so much time consumption, as in, just doing a balasana is not, it's not going to take too much of your energy. But yeah, eventually if we can reach to maybe Bhushir Asana and then Shirshasana, even Sarvangasana, I think the benefits are much, much more. And it's very nice because once you are, addressing all your organs and all your um, body, everywhere it's getting the blood circulation, etc. I think you're empowered to do more other asanas as well, right? I think it helps us and encourages us and strengthens us. It's been
Absolutely.
really
You said something right now which I wanted to highlight as well, right? In Sanskrit, we call them Shishasana and Sarvangasana, right?
yes.
Sarvangasana, the word itself gives you the indication of how powerful this pose is because Sarvangasana means all limbs, right? All body parts. So this
Yes.
is a pose which is addressing every body part while it might not look so, right? And the English version of the pose has done complete disservice to it because we just call it shoulder stand. So you missed out understanding the essence of that asana, right? So when you call it Sarvangasana, you sort of start understanding the potent of this pose. So you just want to leave your audience with that thought as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'd rather, encourage, and this video is out here just to help every student, no matter their age, to maybe slowly start, discovering and, finding their foot in those waters of the inversions. It was really, really nice having you, man. It's every time, I don't know, every time we speak, or even I get to hear you, I get to dive, really deep into the origin of that asana, stories, and a lot of literature about that asana. So it's very, very nice having you here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having you today.
Absolute pleasure, Venus, and thank you for having me. And I said I wanted to leave some last words with your audience a couple of minutes back, but now when you again said dive into the subject, I remembered something else which I want to leave people with, right?
Okay.
So Sri Shasana is actually dedicated to Ravana, right? In a sense, but more his ego, which made him ask too many boons from Shiva, and how those boons were taken away because of his ego, right? And then he also stood 10,000 years in Sri Shasana to again beseech Shiva. So there's that whole. If you go into the mythology side of it, you start understanding a little bit more about the inner life of the asanas. And similarly, the shoulder stand or Sarvangasana is actually dedicated to Balrama, whose big weapon was the plow. But how the pose brings the ego back in check also very interesting story where Balrama was actually going to get married to a queen called Revati, and Revati came from a different generation. Times merged and so on. It's a very interesting story, but I won't go into the details. Anyway, so when Balrama saw Revati and she was much bigger than him in size because she came from a different sort of era, he took his plow and placed it on her head, and she shrunk to his size, and they got married, right? But that's just an allegory of saying how the shoulder stand or the plow pose followed by the shoulder stand brings you back to your embryonic stage or brings you back to your sort of sublimed ego stage. So there's so much more about these asanas, right, which we still don't understand fully. But these are the asanas that you need to practice as heart of your yoga practice, and don't do them immediately after too many rounds of sun salutation or aerobic activities, because these are supposed to be done early on, after a little bit of warm up. But do your more aggressive asanas or more vinyasas after this, but not before this, because for pranayama and for inversions, you need to be very stable before you approach them. So these
Okay,
are my
that's
final
very interesting. That's
points.
an important point. Very nice. Thank you so much. Very
Thank you,
nice.
Venus. Pleasure to be here.
Same here. It's been really, really nice. Very big eye openers and very encouraging. Thank you so much.